Welcome to Tell Us Something. Thank you for coming out tonight for live storytelling here in Missoula. You are Tell Us Something, and Tell Us Something is you. Without your ears, without your stories, there is no Tell Us Something. We are sharing a unique experience together tonight in a way that is not possible with radio or podcasts. Although Tell Us Something does produce a weekly podcast, and you can subscribe to it. Now, more than ever, it is important to share our stories with each other to bring understanding. It is important to actively listen to one another, to join together, and to support each other. Thank you for your support of each other and of each other's stories. Every Tell Us Something event is focused on a theme. Tonight's theme, the unlikeliest of places. Geraldine Carter is a mindset and mindfulness coach who focuses on helping busy, successful women trade in stress and overwhelm for clarity and peace of mind. She was once a 5-time marathoner, lived from a rolling duffel for 10 years, and has ridden her bicycle in more than 25 countries, including a 3-month trip from Burma to Beijing. She now lives in Missoula with her man, her 3 cats, and a little girl where she happily ignores her expired passport and pedals at coasting speed. Please welcome Geraldine Carter.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here and braving the dark and cold and holiday shoppers. One day about 15 years ago, I was riding my bike up a hill in Laos, and I was just minding my own business, enjoying the scenery. It's mountainous, the hillsides are covered with tropical forest, the rivers run clear, the air is clean. There are hardly any vehicles around. It's a rural place, and people sadly are still pretty poor, so it's quiet. And what I hear is the sound of conversation wafting up from the rice paddies. And as I ride by, people's heads lift up and they look and they see me and they wave, and I wave back, and they flash these big, broad, relaxed smiles. Because it never freezes in Laos, and because there aren't that many cars around, the pavement's in great shape, and all of this conspires to make it an awesome place to ride bikes. So I'm riding along, and from seemingly out of nowhere, from up behind me comes another guy on a bike. I'm like, no way. And he probably thinks the same thing. And so we introduce each other. He says, "Hallo, my name is Walter. I'm from the Netherlands." And I'm like, "Hey, my name is Geraldine. I'm from the United States. Nice to meet you." And we start to catch up like old friends, because neither one of us has seen a foreigner, another tourist, anybody who speaks English in like weeks and weeks. And the conversation is like, "Where are you going?" "Oh, I'm going to Angkor Wat. How about you?" "Oh yeah, me too. Cool, we should ride together." "Where'd you come from?" "Oh, I started in Kazakhstan." I'm like, "Where the hell is Kazakhstan?" He's like, "I rode across Tibet. Boy, it was really sandy, but oh my God, it was beautiful. Where'd you come from?" I'm like, "Oh, I started in Burma. I tried to go to China. They wouldn't let me in. Burma wouldn't let me out. So I rode across Thailand. Here I am." And so it goes on like that, and on like that. And at some point he says to me, "Geraldine, I think your bicycle shorts are see-through." "Like that, you say it, right? See-through?" And I'm like, yeah, like that, see-through. But like, this is news to me. I have no idea. And there's nothing I can do about it, so we just keep on riding. And eventually we get to the guest house where we're gonna spend the night, and I take my hot bucket shower. And I change out of my clothes into my clothes, and I pick up my bike shorts off the floor, and I'm like, "So what's the story with these bike shorts?" And I stretch them across the back of my hand, and not only are they see-through, they're like fucking saran wrap. And I'm like, oh God, this is bad. And not only is it bad, it's like bad, but in Laos it's really bad because they dress modestly. The women wear ankle-length sarongs, the men wear billowy pants, they wear long tops with 3/4 length sleeves, and here I am like showing my entire ass to the countryside. And I'm like, oh God. So let me just stop here for a moment just to tell you that when I was in my 20s, I had this fabulous job leading bicycle tours for a high-end travel company. And in the summertime, I'd be in France, Ireland, Switzerland, Portugal. And in the wintertime, they'd send us to warmer places, Patagonia, New Zealand, parts of Asia. And I just finished up leading trips in Bhutan. And in between trips, we'd have a schedule that was something like 3 weeks on, 2 weeks off, 2 weeks on, 1 week off. And I would go to the fleet of bikes, and I'd grab one, and I'd take it for a tour. And over time, like in the time that I was doing this, my longest trip was 2 or 3 weeks, maybe 3, a little bit more. And when I started, I would bring everything with me, and I mean everything, like backup clothes, a cute top, wedges, cone wrenches, chain breaker tool, everything. And slowly I started to get rid of stuff because it was really heavy. And it wasn't until at some point I realized that if the shit really hit the fan, I would just get in a vehicle and go to a bike shop, and I'd be fine. And so at that point, I like really pared down and, no more backup everything, and, change of clothes, sunscreen, toothbrush, flip-flops, done. And so I never had the chance to figure out, like, how long does it take to wear your clothes out? And so that's how I ended up riding on a hill in Laos in threadbare bike shorts. Now, this is bad, but in my book doesn't constitute an emergency, so I wasn't going to get in a Song Tao to go to Vientiane, the capital. And a Song Tao is like a converted pickup truck with benches in the back and bars to hold on tight for when there's only room to stand. And that's fun and all, but I'd rather ride my bike. So I rummage through my stuff, I find a long sleeve t-shirt, tie it in a knot around my waist, and off we go. We get to Vientiane, we locate the bike shop, I go in, it's tiny, I'm like, oh God, what are the chances? And I asked the owner, who's French, in my very best French, I say, do you have any bicycle shorts? And he's like, oui, madame, I have 2 pairs. And I'm like, great. And I look at the first pair, and I'm like, oh God, because they just look like cheap Chinese knockoffs. And I think, bad. If you're riding 50 miles a day, the one thing you really want is a good pair of bike shorts. And these ones look just kind of crappy, and my heart sinks. And I look inside of the tag, and they're men's 2XL. And I'm like, okay, yeah, not gonna work. And I look at the other pair, and hanging off them is a tag that says Giant. I'm like, sweet. If you don't know biking, Giant's a well-known brand, they make good stuff. And I look inside, and the tag says men's medium. I'm like, all right. Medium, great. Men's, not so much, but okay. Beggars can't be choosers. So I go into the changing room, and I pull them on, and they fit. And I'm like, oh, awesome. What are the chances? And the seams are flat lock, which is more comfortable, and the spandex is comfortable, and the chamois feels great. I'm like, sweet. And I'm just kind of looking in the mirror for a sec, admiring my luck. And then I make a fatal mistake. And I turn around, and emblazoned in enormous blue and white letters across the back of my ass is the word Giant. And I'm like, oh God, what do I do? And I sit there, I'm like, oh my God, like, there's no way I'm gonna ride across Southeast Asia with the word Giant on my ass. Like, I just can't do it, no way. Nothing could possibly be more mortifying. And then my rational brain comes online, it's like, get a hold of yourself. Like, you're wearing see-through bike shorts. And I don't know if you've noticed, but nobody here speaks English. Much less are they gonna appreciate the double entendre written on your butt. So get the bike shorts and let's go. And my squirrel brain's like, not so fast. This is totally crazy, I can't do it, oh my God, this is mortifying, nothing could possibly be more humiliating. Like, there's nothing that I'm more self-conscious about than the size of my ass. Like, there's no way you want me to wear Giant on my ass all day long, every day, for everybody to see and giggle at behind their hands? No. And my rational brain comes back and it's like, Geraldine, this is the best. Like, where has your sense of humor gone? Like, nothing could be funnier than riding your bike with the word Giant on your butt. I mean, you are going to win so many props when you get home for doing this. And where has your courage gone? Like, this doesn't sound like the person who just rode here from Burma and got marooned on a hillside and had to spend the night in a tomato truck with 4 drunk Burmese men with pigs in the back. Like, come on. You can do this. And I look at myself and I'm like, oh God, what do I do? And off they go. I put them back on the pins, pull back the curtain, hand them to the owner, and we walk out. Walter looks at me quizzically. I'm like, no man could possibly understand. And so we're on the way back to the guest house, and we pass a fabric shop, and there's spools coming off, and so I ask for a square and some safety pins. And I fashion myself a little butt cape that flaps behind me in the breeze as we ride. And we set off, and we go up past the plain of jars, me and my butt cape through the unexploded ordnances, to Hanoi, limestone karst formations. We ride up and down thousands of feet of terraced rice paddies. We go to a city of 8 million people in China called Kunming. You've never heard of it. We come back down. We ride through the tea plantations of Pu'er with my little butt cape, and we cross the Mekong River, and we get to Chiang Mai, Thailand, where each of us ends the cycling part of our trip. And this was an amazing journey. I can't even begin to describe everything that happened, what I learned, and all of it. And, this is a funny story. And there were times where it was downright miserable, hard, cold, dirty, polluted, and everything. But if I learned anything, and I could leave you with 2 things, it's 1, never leave home without your trusty butt cape. And 2, nothing good ever comes from looking at your butt in the mirror. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Geraldine. Gary Walchola has lived in New York and taught English in Austria. Montana keeps calling him back home. Gary studies education and has worked as an actor, lifeguard, teaching assistant at a Renaissance fair, and played a murderer on a crime reenactment show. True story. He would like to thank his parents for teaching him the joy of stories and adventure. Please welcome Gary Walchola.
I'm on a train. I'm looking out the window at snow-covered fields. I'm leaving the mountains of Austria. Now I'm entering the forests of Slovakia. The trees are covered in mistletoe. And I think, ever since my great-grandparents left this place, I am the first one in our family ever to come back. I asked my dad where our ancestors came from, but he said that his grandparents didn't like to talk about it back then. And of course, since 2 world wars, communism, capitalism, the Velvet Revolution, the borders had changed quite a bit. But that year, I had a lucky opportunity. I was working as a teaching assistant in Austria, and I thought, well, this would be my chance to visit the village where my great-grandparents came from. So after a little bit more digging, we found a letter that said where my great-grandfather had been baptized. So I thought I would visit. I also found a news article that said that there was an Andy Warhol museum in the area, and I thought that would be interesting too, because my last name is Walchola, and Andy Warhol's original last name was Warhola. So, of course, it's a sort of, an Americanization, whatever, when they came in through immigration. So, finally, I'm traveling. It's New Year's Day. The train is late because there's snow. It's really, really, really cold, and I'm glad I wore long underwear. I get on a bus in Kosacha, and I'm sitting in the bus, and I'm listening to everyone else talking. I look out on the highway and I see a bunch of advertisements for cell phones or whatever in a language that I can't even understand, covering communist East Bloc housing and farm fields. And I think, my ancestors spoke this language for generations and I have no idea what anyone is saying. When I finally get to the village, I look out and I think, this place must look nothing like the place that my great-grandfather left behind. There's only communist block housing, there's a warehouse, there's houses that all look like they were built probably about 40 years ago or so. I get out, and I try to find some kind of tourist office or something. I see a sign for a tourist office, and a guy points me there, but it's closed. I keep going. I see a zoo with a picture of a tiger on a rusted old metal sign, but it's closed for the season too. I keep going to the edge of the town, and I see a lake that's frozen over. There are people ice skating on the lake. Next to the lake is a brand new building, a hotel. That's where I'm staying for the night. So I go over there, and there's a man behind the counter. I go up, I begin talking with him, and it turns out that he's a Turkish man who had lived in Austria for a few years, so it's actually easier for us both to speak German to each other, which is interesting because it's neither one of our native languages and we are not in the country where it's spoken. So I go into the dining room with him, and I look out at the window and I see the people ice skating. And I ask him, is there any way that maybe I could rent some ice skates? That looks like a lot of fun. He turns to the other people and they start talking for a bit. They turn back to me and they say, no. Okay. I go up to my room. The hotel is completely empty, and I feel a little bit like I'm in The Shining. So I decide to go wander around the town a little bit. I go outside, I pass some of the block housing. There's a little hill where kids are sledding down the hill and having fun. I keep going, I cross the river into Boksa, which is actually the village where my grandfather lived. But it looks like all of these houses are new too. Also, except for the church. The church was probably there during his time. The next day I decide that I want to visit this Andy Warhol museum. I try to find a bus. There's no buses that day. So I wait another day. The next day I finally am able to catch a bus. I'm riding to Metzeler-Borche, and I miss the stop, of course. So I'm brought way over to the other edge of the town, and I walk back. I see an onion-domed Eastern Orthodox church. It's beautiful, right next to the museum, which seems a little bit out of place in this town. It's a bit of a pop art museum with Campbell's soup cans right in front of it, and no one in the parking lot. I go up to the front door, and it's closed. So I traveled all this way, and I don't get to see the museum. Well, okay, I have to work tomorrow, so I guess I better go get a ticket back home. I go and I buy a train ticket, but the next train isn't leaving for about 3 hours, so I have some time to kill. I wander around the town, I go get a coffee, and I decide to take one last look at the museum. I see a guy walking towards the museum. It looks like he's going inside. It looks like he works there. I run up to him and I try to ask him a question, and he says, he doesn't speak English. And I say, well, sprechen Sie Deutsch? No. Russian? Oh, no. Okay, all right. And I say, well, it's closed? And he nods yes. I start to head back to the train station. But then I hear, hey! And he waves for me to come over. He opens the door and he lets me in. So I pay the admission fee, and I head up the stairs. They turn on the light and they start playing music. I look around. It's a pop art installation in eastern Slovakia, near the border of Poland and Ukraine. Suddenly, I'm no longer in eastern Slovakia. I'm in New York again, a place where I had used to live. I had moved to New York as an actor a couple years before that. Perhaps I wanted my own, 15 minutes of fame. And I think about it. This New York, Andy Warhol's New York, looks so small, different, but yet similar to the same place that I had lived. And I wondered, Andy Warhol's parents came from this place. What part of this place was still with him? And what part of this place is still with me? We always like to say, white Americans, white European Americans, we always like to say, I'm Irish, I'm German, and I always said I'm Slovak, but I've never really understood what that means. Eventually, I have to go. I leave the museum, and I get on the train. I'm riding out through the snow-covered fields, and I look out, and I remember being in my great-grandfather's village, standing in the snow-covered fields. I walk up behind the church and pass through the forests. I get to a field, and I ask myself, did my great-grandfather also stand in this place? Did he stand here the day before he left, maybe? I think about all the people who've ever had to leave their homes because of poverty or war, something that's still happening today. And I imagine my grandfather thinking, looking out on this place. He too would travel around the world, but he would never see this place ever again. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. If our next storyteller looks familiar to you, it's probably because she works at the customer service desk at the Good Food store. Ann Karp also wields a paintbrush for sideways gaze signs, her window and sign art business. She and her husband, Jay, hiked the Appalachian Trail a few years ago with wet feet through the entire state of Massachusetts. But that's not her story tonight. Please welcome Ann Karp.
The driveway was really long, maybe a mile long, but surprisingly beautiful. There were tall Georgia pines on each side of it, and I went up, parked the car, and went in the front gates. I left with the lady there. I left my wallet with my ID and all my money, anything metal I had on me. I left the car keys, and with me I brought just the clothes on my back and a cotton handkerchief full of quarters for the vending machines. I went down a long hallway and I got to the waiting room, so I took a seat, and it was full of people and families running around, and it smelled like microwave popcorn from the vending machines. And I waited till my name was called, and then I went through a really heavy locked door, and it locked behind me. And then I went through another very heavy door, and that one locked behind me. And then I was in this long, narrow room, and it was a room full of dudes. And one of them stood up, and that was Marcus. And he gave me a hug, he offered me a seat, and a styrofoam cup full of water from the water cooler, and we sat and we talked. And we talked about literature and politics and our lives and the usual stuff you talk with your friends about. And I got stuff from the vending machines, we ate snacks, and we visited for a long time, and then when it was time for me to go, I went and he stayed. And that is kind of what it's like to visit death row in Jackson, Georgia. So you might wonder how I came to have a friend on death row in Georgia, so here's how. At the time, I lived on a Christian pecan farm commune in rural Georgia, which is a story for another time. There was one weekend a little conference about prisons, and I went to it, and somebody took photos and wrote up a little article in a newsletter, and that newsletter was circulated, and it went to the prisons, and Marcus saw the newsletter, he saw my picture in it, and he told me later, he thought, we're gonna be friends. That sounds a little creepy. But he gave the letter to the guy who worked with that prison ministry, and the guy gave it to me, and he said, don't feel any obligation to write to this guy. You don't have to write to this guy. He's on death row. He seems okay. So I read the letter, and I was idealistic and a little bit younger, and I said okay, and so I started writing to him, and he wrote back, and we exchanged letters maybe once or twice a month, and we got to know each other better, learned about his mom and his daughter and his family and his life, and after maybe a year or two, he asked if I wanted to be on his visitor list. So an inmate gets, I think it's 12 people who can come see them. And I was thinking about it. I think that would be the only people you'd ever see besides other inmates and guards and maybe the occasional lawyer. So this is a pretty special request. So I got the request, and I don't know why I never really looked into what Marcus had done to be convicted to end up where he was. And I finally, I mean, it's not like the pecan farm didn't have internet or something. slow internet. So I finally did that. I went into the office one night and I fired up the old computer and I Googled his name. And the news results came forth and I kind of sat there paralyzed. I had always assumed, and I'm not sure why, that it had just been some kind of barroom brawl gone wrong and unintentional, just something bad happened, accidental. But no, I was wrong. It was really bad. He had raped and murdered a 15-year-old girl. And so I sat there, and I'm a feminist, I'm a nonviolent person. If I had just read about Marcus in the paper, I would have assumed a lot of things about him, and a lot of those things would probably be true, and I realized I couldn't really figure out what to do logically, so I think the question came down to, who can I be friends with? Who can be friends with me? And I've always believed that we're all better than the worst thing we've ever done. But how far does that go? So I just sort of let it simmer for a couple of days. And eventually occasionally you get that still small voice inside that very occasionally, in my case, provides a little bit of guidance. And it said, yes, you can be friends. You and Marcus can be friends. So I said, yes, I'll be on your visitor list. And so from there, it was pretty simple. I just checked out the old Buick from the commune and drove up to the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison, and I do that a couple times a year, and we'd visit for 5 or 6 hours. When you don't get a lot of visitors, you want to maximize your time. So we'd visit for a really long time each time, and we talked about everything. I got to know him. I learned a lot from him. The very first time I went, I think he felt like he had to sort of explain himself or be upfront, and so he told me that story, and he never said he didn't do it. So I think he did it. And he was really nervous when he was telling the story. Normally he was really calm, and he was about, he had a daughter about my age and very warm, but he was just so nervous when he told this story, and just beads of sweat. And so that was the first time, and we didn't really talk about that again. I also learned he had this remarkable approach to the rest of his life on death row, and he had a name for it. He called it Life Row Ministries. And I don't know if it was penance or just the way he was, but he seemed to be trying to do the most good that he possibly could in the time he had left. So he wrote a lot. He was a prolific writer. He was a man of faith. He prayed for so many people, and he tried to be a good dad, a good son, and he counseled people. He had pen pals all over the world. He had lots and lots of pen pals, and he would even counsel and listen to the guards, the people who were charged with keeping him in there. They were from a small town, impoverished small town, not a lot of employment opportunities. They had their problems too, and so he'd listen to them, and so that was our friendship. And I'd visit him a couple of times a year for a couple of years, and then I moved to Montana, and we grew apart at that point, and that's all on me. Of course, we couldn't visit anymore, but I just gradually, my life here, I guess it just happens with friends sometimes. So I wrote a little less and a little less until we weren't writing anymore. And I would always think of him, though, when I would be driving around and hear the radio and I'd hear of someone who had been executed on death row. I would go home immediately and was it Marcus? Was it Marcus? And one time I was driving home from work, and I heard the news report that somebody in Georgia had the lethal injection, and I went home and I Googled his name, and it was him. So that was the second time I had sat paralyzed in front of a computer screen thinking about Marcus. And it was harder than I expected to hear that, to learn that, even though, I mean, everybody knew he was going to run out of appeals sooner or later. And the next day I talked with my father-in-law, who still lived in Georgia. He provided a few details that he'd learned from the news that kind of helped me. Marcus had been surrounded by, his family had been there, so that was good to learn. And he'd been praying in his last moments, which is very Marcus. And some of his last words were that he hoped that his death would bring some kind of small amount of peace to the family of the victim. So that was on his mind till the end, too. So that's the end of Marcus's story and his life. And as for me, I'm a little bit older and probably more jaded now, but I'm really grateful that I said yes to that friendship. And I would hope that if an opportunity, wherever it came from, for an unusual friendship came up again, I hope that I would say yes again. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Greg Reagan is a fourth-generation Michigander, but has been living in Missoula for 10 years. He spends most of his time cooking, playing kickball, listening to records, reading comic books, and thinking about where he will find his next taco. Please welcome Greg Reagan.
I was born in Detroit, Michigan, as was my father, as was his father. And when you're born in a city like Detroit, you don't get to choose your sports allegiance. I was born a Red Wings fan, a Tigers fan, a Pistons fan, and really unfortunately, a Detroit Lions fan. If you don't know, the Detroit Lions are habitually the worst franchise in professional sports. Since I was born, the Red Wings have won 4 Stanley Cups, the Tigers have won a World Series and played in 2 others, the Pistons have won 3 World Championships, and the Lions, well, since my father was born, the Lions have won 1 playoff game. That was 25 years ago. They're bad. They're just really, really bad. They've been bad my whole life. 8 years ago, they set the record for losses in a season with 16. 0 wins, 16 losses. But unlike here in Montana, you don't get to choose your sports teams when you're from Detroit. But I'm always gonna be a Detroit Lions fan, forever and ever and ever. And not because anything they've ever done on the field, because any joy they've ever brought me has been far, far, far outweighed by just heartbreak and disappointment. But I'm gonna be a Detroit Lions fan through and through because of one day in 2012 when the Detroit Lions saved my life. I moved to Missoula about 10 years ago, and one of the first things I remember about moving to Missoula were people asking me, have I ever been to Butte? Specifically, have I ever been to Butte on St. Patrick's Day? If you don't know anything about Butte, it's a very, very proud old mining town. Around the turn of the century, had over 100,000 people, and just money and culture and music and life. And then the mines dried up, and the population, a lot of them left. But a lot of that population were descendants of Irish immigrants who came to work in those mines. And so St. Patrick's Day It's something. It's something to the people of Butte. They take it pretty seriously. There's a lot of music and a lot of dancing and a lot of drinking and a lot of fighting. And so in 2012, I decided to, check that off my Montana bucket list and spend a St. Patrick's Day in Butte. A friend of a friend had just opened a new micro distillery in Butte and asked my friend if she had any friends that would want to come and work in the tasting room on St. Patrick's Day. Sounded like that was an A-OK job with me, working as a bartender on St. Patrick's Day. And so we decided to go over to Butte. St. Patrick's Day was on a Saturday that year. We decided to go over on Friday night, spend all day Saturday and come back Sunday. And we went over in 2 shifts because some of us couldn't get off work earlier. I was in part of the early shift. We went over early and we got to the place we were staying and we checked it out and we set up our beds and everything and then decided to go walk around old historic uptown Butte. That blew my mind. Butte is such a cool town with so many beautiful and just beautiful architecture, and you can just see the life that if it's not there now, it definitely once was, but there's a lot of people working there now to bring it back, and I'm with them on that. But just walking around this place with these beautiful, ornate, awesome buildings that were, in various states of disrepair, it reminded me a lot of Detroit in that way. And we walked around for, I have no idea how long, an hour and a half, and when we were walking back, we were about a block away from the place we were staying, and I could see that my friends from the second shift had just arrived and were literally just getting out of the car, had sleeping bags under their arms and backpacks over their shoulders. And we were really excited to go, talk to them about all the cool stuff we just saw. And we were about a half a block away, and from across the street, I just hear this, "Hey!" And I didn't think anything of it, so we kept walking. I want to say hi to my friends. "Hey!" I still don't think anything of it. And then I hear it, it's really loud. "Hey, you!" And I look, and there's 3 guys marching across the street. And it's kind of a busy street, North Montana Avenue in Butte. It's not exactly it's kind of a busy street. And they're just marching over. They're not talking to me, obviously, so I just keep walking. I'm really excited to say hi to my friends. And then they walk all the way across the street, and the guy in the lead walks right up to me, and he says, "Hey, I asked you a question." I'm sorry, what did you ask me? I said, "Do you consider yourself a certified hipster?" And just so we know, I was literally wearing exactly what I'm wearing right now. I think I had a hoodie on. I had jeans, a hoodie, this hat that my parents bought in Ireland that I thought was pretty appropriate to wear on St. Patrick's Day. And some glasses. And he asked me again. I said, "Do you consider yourself a certified hipster?" And at this time, I have no recollection of what happened next. This is all hearsay from my friends who told me what happened because I completely blacked out from fear. But while I was blacked out, pure instinct took over. And I looked at these guys, and I just kind of stood there. There's 3 guys. The only thing I remember about these guys is they were 9 feet tall and reeked of Jameson whiskey. And I looked him, and I looked him up and down, and I looked all around, and then I saw it. The guy in front, the guy who had pushed me, the guy who had asked me if I was a hipster was wearing a baseball cap. And on the front of that baseball cap, in shining Honolulu blue and silver, was a Detroit lion. And I don't remember any of this. It's all been told to me secondhand. But I just looked at this guy. I said, "You know what? I don't consider myself a certified hipster, but I do consider myself a certified Lions fan." And I tapped him on the bill of his cap. And this obviously confused the hell out of him. He had no idea what to make of me. He just looked at me, and I said, are you from Michigan? I'm from Michigan. And he said, "No, I'm from fucking Butte. And I said, well then, why the hell are you a Lions fan? I don't know. I literally to this day have never met anyone outside of the state of Michigan who was a Lions fan by choice. Like, I don't understand it. But I just started talking to him about the Lions. I said, hey man, you think they got a chance this year? I don't know, they might make the playoffs. How about that Calvin Johnson? You think he's gonna catch 1,000 yards this year? What do you think? I took off my hoodie, I rolled up my sleeve, and I showed him my Detroit tattoo. And all the while, I was just like motioning behind my friends, like, get in the door, get away from these guys, let's get out of here. And I talked to him, like I said, I don't remember any of this, I don't know how long it took, but I talked to him for what seemed like forever. We might have been out there for an hour. I'm really not sure. But I just kept backing away and backing away and backing away, closer to the door, closer to the door, closer to the door, and finally said, all right, guys, happy St. Patrick's Day. And I walked in the door behind me and I locked it. And that's when my memory kicks back in, and I just remember thinking, breathe, Greg, breathe, you're alive, breathe. And from that day forward, forever and ever and ever, through and through, to the deepest parts of my soul, I will be a Detroit Lions fan. Thank you.